This is probably the most important thing that you could learn about within psychology because it very much dictates life or death, depending on how you deal with your life or how you react to the things in which happen in your life. So in this video, I want to talk to you about the hidden dangers of ignoring your shadow and how it could or can lead to something like psychological suicide, psychosis, if you ignore this very important part of yourself. So what is the shadow? It's often talked about online, it's talked about in many different places, and it's got a lot of mystical connotations. Loads of people apply it to things that don't really have any relevance and make it sound very confusing, but I'm here to make sure that you understand it so it's not confusing to you. Basically what it is a repository within the psyche of that in which you repress, that in which you do not do but know you should do. And that is where the content of those things in which you know you should do goes. It goes into the shadow. It doesn't go towards the construction of the ego. It goes to the shadow, which is something of repression. So let me give you an example. Everything you repress, everything you avoid doing, everything you avoid doing out of fear, out of insecurity, out of anxiety, out of anything like that, that you know you should do specifically, that you're basically a coward towards not doing because you haven't done it. It goes into the shadow. And it builds over time. And the reason why this is not a good thing is because it builds an identity which is counter to the identity in which you have right now, the identity of the ego, this sense of self that you have. When you don't do something you know you should do, you feel regret and shame towards yourself. And the reason why you feel that regret and shame towards yourself is because you know you've been a coward and you know that you haven't done something in which you should have done. So you have these very negative emotions that build over time, that collect and build up to such a strong degree that they become debilitating, such as shame and regret. And those emotions are basically built over time within what we could call the shadow. So the more you avoid doing certain things, the more you are anxious and you allow your anxiety to control you, the more you allow fear to control you, the more you allow insecurities to control you, to not do certain things you know you should do, to go through experiences that you know you should go through to develop your sense of self, to develop your personality, to develop who you are as a person, to build upon your purpose as a person. The more you avoid those things out of insecurity, the more shame and regret you build within yourself. And what the shadow has because of this is basically a collection of repression, a collection of regret and shame in which follow you for a long time, the longer and the more you continue to ignore those things in which you should do to allow yourself to grow and for you to go through some form of personal growth in your own life. But the problem that comes up that is extremely dangerous, not only to the psyche, but to the physical body, to the mind, to the fact that you might fall into mental illness or physical illness or even possible psychological, physical suicide, is that if you continue to ignore, if you continue to not do what you know you are supposed to do, to follow your conscience, if you continue to neglect your conscience and neglect your purpose, that shadow, which we're talking about, will consume your ego and you will fall into some sort of illness. Because what you are doing is you are inadvertently feeding the shadow the more you don't do what you know you need to do. Because that regret and that shame builds up over time, which acts as a counter narrative to your own identity in which you wish to have, which encompasses things of courage and confidence and strength. Instead, that counter identity of the shadow is instead saying things to you of intrusive thoughts, self-limiting beliefs, things that counter or act as a counter narrative to who you know you should be. And the more you avoid doing what you know you should do, this narrative grows larger and larger within your own mind, and you become more debilitated by anxiety, by fear, by insecurity, by all of these things that encompass avoidance. And the shadow, we can say, will grow so large to an extent that it literally consumed the ego. It will replace the ego, and you will just become debilitated by psychosis. Maybe you'll fall into psychosis, maybe you'll fall into some physical illness, maybe you'll fall into something that just completely makes you someone who you were not before. You become unidentifiable compared to the person you were before. Major depression, you become someone who you were not. And that is because you have allowed avoidance, repression, insecurity, and all of these things to build a counter-narrative against your true identity and who you truly want to be. This is why it's so important to always face your fears, to always face uncertainty, to face the unknown and to embrace it. The reason why the ego will get consumed and you fall into some sort of psychosis or mental illness or something like this is because the ego is that in which grows based on relation, based on how you relate to the world. So the more you learn about things of the world, the more you experience the world, the more you understand people, the more all of this type of stuff, the more you build an understanding of the world. And that ties back to your ego, which is your identity, because you're building experiences that allow you to relate to the world. Therefore, you have a stable identity, a stable ego. But the more you don't do that, because you're in fear of certain things, you have anxiety, you allow these avoidant tendencies to get in the way of doing that, the more you are cutting these little strings that tie back to your ability to grow your self-identity or to become yourself. So the more you do that, the more you build a counter-narrative to the existence of your own identity. And your identity will shrink, or you will face a misunderstanding of who you are. You won't really know who you are because you're not doing what you know you should be doing to experience or have new experiences within this world. And the more you limit yourself of those experiences, the more you will lose a sense of identity. The more you'll have an existential crisis of some sorts. The more you'll have, you'll lose a sense of purpose. You won't know what you're supposed to be doing, even though you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, which is integrating that in which is in your shadow. A lot of people talk about the shadow in the sense of, oh, it's the things that are evil and you need to integrate them. And it's like, no, it's that in which you have repressed because you have avoided doing, because you're in fear of doing those things, because you have some sort of insecurity in relation to yourself. That is what is in the shadow. That is what you need to integrate through experience so that you become a well-rounded individual who has an integrated personality, who doesn't have these insecurities here and there that control them to the point where they literally alienate themselves from the world. That is fundamentally what we're dealing with here. So the more you don't do that particular thing, the more you build a narrative that is against the existence of your own self-identity. And this over time slowly pushes you further and further into a place of psychosis of any kind, I would say, because you're losing a grip of reality. And this, I would say, is the most important thing to understand. And this really drives home, like you hear about like the stories like in mythologies where it's like the hero's journey. He needs to face the unknown, or she needs to face the unknown, needs to face that in which is challenging, face uncertainty, embrace uncertainty. All these things are extremely fundamental because you can only develop a strong identity that is healthy when you are constantly facing the unknown, embracing the unknown, and understanding the world through experience and relation. The less you are doing that, the more you are denying yourself of who you are supposed to become. And I would say, like most people on the whole who have depression, have anxiety, maybe have had suicidal tendencies, maybe have had gone through some of these extremely bad mental health episodes. A lot of these things start off, especially in today's century, where we are most alienated than ever, where we are most disconnected than ever before from anything that's shared culturally or anything like this. This is the main reason why people have mental health problems. It's not because of, what you usually hear. It's usually because they have too many repressions. And those repressions create a counter-narrative to their true selves. And in a sense, you're psychologically dealing with these two forces, that of the shadow, let's say, which feeds these negative intrusive thoughts that build up over time the more you neglect experiences of life out of insecurity, and then your ego, which wants to experience the world and wants to understand the world and wants to embrace the world and build a strong identity for itself. These two forces are like always fighting with each other in a sense of dominance in one way or another. And the more you feed one, that one will encapsulate or control the other one, or try and overcome the other thing, psychologically speaking. This is why building things like courage and strength are so important, because you need to overcome fear through action. You need to overcome and reclaim your lost potential and redefine your identity based on courage and strength rather than cowardice. Cowardice is kind of the essence by which the shadow grows or uses to grow over time to kind of, deconstruct or break down your self-esteem or your sense of identity. And the more you become cowardly, the more you neglect experiences of the world or any of these types of things, the more you put yourself down, the more you are feeding that part of yourself that's going to go against who you truly want to be. And that's the force of the shadow, you could say. I don't say this is like a traditional description of how it's talked about in Jungian terms or anything like this, but this is what I think is most relevant from what I've seen with people, especially in the context of self-deprecation or self-destructive, self-limiting beliefs, thoughts about themselves, how these kind of narratives within our own mind build and how they actually have a physical effect upon us if we allow those things to overcome us entirely, either mentally through psychosis or physically through illness. So this is where I really think understanding this aspect of ourselves and how we treat ourselves is very important if we want to become people who are healthy and happy fundamentally. Now, if you feel like this is something that very much relates to you and that you are struggling with, then I highly recommend you booking that free one-on-one coaching call down below. We can talk for 30 minutes straight on any of the problems that you're dealing with and struggling with, and we can see if I can apply any of the techniques or the processes that I use with my clients to see if that will also help with you as well. So if that is something you're interested in, make sure to book in that call down below in the comment section or in the description below. And with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next video.